Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. European leaders gathering in Helsinki this week are testing a faster, more flexible model of defence cooperation for the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force, one that can act outside of NATO's consensus rules. Now, with Ukraine integration deepening, drone warfare reshaping priorities, and Baltic security tightening, the question is whether speed is starting to outweigh unity. And now to discuss it all further, we're joined by Dr. Eoin Micheál McNamara, researcher, Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Good to have you with us.
Good morning.
All right, so let's also give us a little recap. I mean, this took place in Helsinki. Jeff, this expeditionary force, ideal to complement NATO, or is this something operationally now separate? What is the future of this kind of cooperation?
I think you're spot on by saying that this is very much complementary. The JEF is not a substitute for NATO. If we look back at the history of the JEF, although not a part of NATO institutionally, it was established in 2014 at NATO's Wales summit, ironically. As a relatively small force. We're only talking 10,000 personnel in the JEF. If we compare that to, say, NATO's ARF, Allied Response Force, which can mobilize 100,000 within 10 days, the JEF is still a very small project militarily, and it's designed to complement what NATO is doing across the continent with a Northern European focus, because these states in Northern Europe have the same situational awareness and the same operational needs. So very much supplementary, I would argue.
Okay. And you're saying they share operational needs, and one of those obviously is Russia. Let's just hear what some of those leaders had to say at that summit now. Let's roll that for you.
What type of Russia we're going to be looking at from the north is going to be very much affected with how Ukraine ends. So this is always going to be the backdrop of any discussion of security in the high north, of how you may put it, that we're all focused on containing the main aggressor from these areas, whether it's from the east, from the north, and we definitely do not want to see a victorious Russia on the northern flank 12 months from now.
If you're looking at it from a Russian perspective, and if you're really honest to yourself, you have to understand that for 1% of Ukrainian land, they have lost 500,000 Russian soldiers. I think that puts things into perspective. There needs to be a change in the strategic goal of Russia for this war to end.
Also on that note, I mean, you said as well, Eoin, that this is very much about operationals. I'm looking at one of these statements, rather a sentence from the joint statement here, and it says here, leaders said they wanted to maximize future operational collaboration opportunities with Ukraine. So listening to that, let's translate that. How far and realistically can that kind of collaboration go before it becomes something like a security guarantee with Ukraine?
Well, the JEF isn't really about security guarantees. I remember it was one of the original reasons, which is now redundant, fortunately, I would argue, was to bridge NATO and non-NATO countries. So Finland and Sweden joined the JEF after 2014. I believe it was 2017, 3 years after the JEF's inauguration. So it was designed to bridge NATO and non-NATO countries in Northern Europe at that time, so that their militaries could cooperate, so that they could train together. That training would keep armed forces sharp, and potentially that they could deploy together as a force for everything from rapid response for humanitarian needs to rapid response for deterrence needs in Northern Europe. So that logic of bridging NATO and non-NATO states has always been there, and I would argue that this is particularly vital at this time, because Ukrainians and indeed Russians, unfortunately, are streets ahead in drone warfare. They know the current state of play in drone warfare, and they have much better insight into the future of drone warfare as a vital, defining aspect of warfare. And in Europe, in NATO, and indeed individual Northern European countries, we need that expertise from Ukraine. So Ukraine gets other aspects to keep its armed forces sharp, gets closer political alignment to key NATO countries, and in response, the JEF members can gain Ukrainian insights into drone warfare in particular. So the JEF can be a very, very good vehicle to bridge this. And I think maybe the summit hasn't gone far enough, that the JEF should be looking to take Ukraine in as a full JEF member ASAP, as soon as possible, in my view.
All right. Also, with what we've also heard in those comments as well, I mean, this is very much a Northern European focus. We heard that in the statement, the High North, the Arctic. How, let's say, critical is a military focus on the High North and the Arctic? Is that something that's now covered enough, or is it still something that allies are not, let's say, taking at the highest value and, let's say, concentration as they need to?
No, I think things are definitely pivoting that way. Catalyzed by Donald Trump's, threats to take Greenland earlier this year and the whole controversy over that, as well as what's happening in the High North itself. The melt of ice that's opening up different trade routes, potentially different sources of raw materials and minerals. So most of the region states are perceiving future security challenges there. Most of the region states are quite small, the Nordic states, Canada. So they need defense instruments to hone their skills in that regard, and potentially to deploy to the Arctic if necessary. But as I mentioned, the JEF is well specialized, well set up for that purpose, but it's still only a force of 10,000 personnel. NATO's force generation capacity is far in excess of that, and NATO, at least at this moment, remains the main collective defense instrument when we talk about these Arctic security challenges.
And one of those challenges, I think this probably was addressed here, is the Russian shadow fleet. Now, I believe it was the UK and the Prime Minister said that the UK is ready to board Russian shadow fleet vessels. So in practical terms, do you see allied countries, JEF, in some way involved in that, and to what capacity?
Probably not JEF directly. This is probably a bilateral, more a bilateral policy area for individual EU and NATO members. I remember the boarding of one of the Shadow Fleet vessels, or a suspected Shadow Fleet vessel, the Eagle S, just over a year ago in Finland. I mean, the Helsinki police and the Finnish border guard, and the border guard in Finland is very much a military organization under Finland's Ministry of Interior rather than its Ministry of Defense, but nonetheless. So it tends to be these type of areas, border guard, police agencies, that react first to a lot of Shadow Fleet activity. That said, I mean, there's different aspects on the spectrum in that regard. And being from Ireland, I've spoken about this out in the North Atlantic. We could see scenarios on Shadow Fleet vessels where special ops from the UK, or indeed Ireland, and indeed in and around the Baltic Sea, military personnel from these countries board these vessels, and they're confronted by private military company actors, or indeed Russian military actors without their insignia, and some sort of confrontation takes place. So we need to be wary that's how close the line of contact potentially is in these vessels out at sea in Baltic and North Atlantic maritime zones. And that line of contact as well, let's talk about that. I mean, also from the statement from Thursday, addressing very much that reacting to threats, JEF reacting to threats, quoting here, that do not meet the threshold of NATO's Article 5.
So addressing this kind of gray zone area. So at which point, first of all, give us your take on what that means practically, and at what point does it become basically going into Article 5? What's the distinction there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the scenario we just discussed, these kind of shadow fleet vessels are they, they're transporting oil. What's their military purpose? I mean, are they carrying private military company actors? We once spoke about Wagner group in Russia, but there's many other Russian private military companies, and Russia has deployed personnel like that on these vessels. It has been discussed and reported in the past. What's their role for intelligence gathering for Russia? Is Russia using these vessels to gather intelligence in the Balkans, in the Baltic Sea rather? Are they using these vessels for intelligence to then plot different hybrid maneuvers in and around the Baltic Sea, say when we talk about undersea infrastructure and damage and sabotage to that? Responding to that potentially is not an Article 5 issue. The JEF is more nimble, to put it that way, and can be deployed quickly. You only need 2 JEF countries. I would argue, 2 JEF countries, if it's Estonia and Latvia, mightn't have the clout or the capacity. But if it's Britain plus Finland, Britain plus Estonia, Britain plus Latvia, Britain plus Lithuania, and that's only 2. Many, many more JEF countries can be involved, or multiple more JEF countries can be involved. It can be, the JEF in this regard, I would say, it can be a force multiplier rather than states confronting this hybrid activity on their own.
Right, as you said there as well, interesting how JEF does seem to be a complementary tool to NATO. It will not replace, but as you said as well, a nimble force indeed. So look, we'll close it there. Thank you so much as ever. Always good to have you with us. Dr. Eoin Micheál McNamara, researcher, Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.